And I just turned around and I hauled ass out of there. I was done. I wasn't dealing with that.
The hypocrisy of the cult is one of the things that turned me away the quickest.
When I turned my headlights on, it turned and looked at us. And one of the things I remember the most were the eyes were glowing red.
I see an orb of light. It is just circling these steps like it is waiting for me.
And he begins to tell them that he saw a UFO. They're basically like, what are you talking about? That's 7 foot up on a tree, peeking around it. And that's where I saw the top of the muzzle, nose, and the eyes. As soon as I made eye contact with this thing, it felt like death.
Welcome back to Tinfoil Tales. I'm your host, Brandon. Tonight we're going to be joined by my guest, Rod. Rod, how you doing?
Doing great, man. How are you doing?
Not too bad. We were chit-chatting beforehand, talking about our weird connection with metal music.
Yeah, I think it's great. I love it. I love the fact that, you know, we have that connection and we can talk about metal and all that cool stuff.
I definitely enjoy talking to fellow musicians. I had another podcast that I was doing for a while with my friend Ed. People on here might recognize him. He's been on a few episodes too. But it was called Dark Side of the Scene, and we interviewed musicians, and instead of talking about like a lot of stuff, but we'd talk about the struggles of being in a band, of being a musician, all the horror stories of getting your gear stolen and stuff like that. Like, stuff that you don't ever hear about. So we tried to do that show, and we did it for about a year, and it just didn't pan out the way we wanted it to.
Oh man. You know, that sounds interesting though. And I can relate to that because, you know, I've heard of, you know, I toured through Canada, and one of the last dates was Quebec, Montreal, Quebec. And, you know, we pulled up our van and trailer up, you know, alongside the venue on the main street. And the promoter came out and said, "Hey man, like park your van and trailer in the back. It's less conspicuous." And I'm like, why is this guy so adamant about this? And he was like, "Hey," he's like, "just want to let you know, like whole tour buses and trailers have been stolen right here because the Russian mafia controls a lot of this area, and it'll be gone, and there's no way to get it back." And that blew my mind. A whole
insane.
tour bus. Yeah.
I didn't do a whole lot of touring, but I didn't have to worry about that either. So I guess I lucked out.
No, you lucked out because it's a headache.
Well, before we get into it, would you like to let the audience know a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Rod Nichols, and I'm from Bexar County Bigfoot. I'm based out of San Antonio, Texas, where you know, the county is Bexar County. If you know, kind of put two and two together. I've been doing it for about 7 years, and you know, started out, I think, like a lot of other, you know, investigators or cryptozoologists. I started out as a you know, as a fan from a young person, you know, just watching Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, and you know, any of the high strangeness, unsolved mysteries, you know, any of the shows that were out there at that time. I'm an 80s kid, so, you know, grew up with all that stuff. And, you know, it was one of those things where when I was presented with the idea that there could be a, you know, a biped that's upwards in 8 to 9 feet tall and covered in hair out there, I quickly, I mean, it just sucked me in. And, you know, I was that kid at the book fair that was, you know, buying the Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster books, and just, you know, just really, and I tell people this because I can remember plainly just seeing this stuff, you know, on TV. And, you know, obviously the Patterson Gimlin film is just is the cornerstone kind of our evidence, you know, or alleged evidence, whoever you talk to. You know, so for me, I've always felt like I was a believer from day one, from when I just discovered cryptids, you know. And so it just spiraled into, me getting into I was really into primates. I was into the mountain gorillas and Diane Fossey and her work as well. And I was such a nerd about the gorillas and especially the mountain gorillas up in Africa. And so it kind of morphed into that. And then as I got older, life happens. You get married, you have kids, and you kind of live your life. And I soon found myself on disability and from work, and was going through some stuff, and it was just a really tough time in my life. And I remember binge watching this channel on YouTube, and it was a guy out of Utah, and he presented this trace evidence that was in the form of wood structures. And I had no recollection of what wood structures were, and nor did I know these things to be attributed to, quote, alleged Sasquatch activity or cryptid activity for that matter, or any type of viable trace evidence for that matter. So for me, watching this guy's videos, and, he had other stories of his encounters with some of these creatures as well. And they were very compelling. And I watched all of his videos, and it was just like in one night. And I'm on long-term disability. I've got nothing else going on. I'm kind of by myself, and so I had all the time in the world. So I watched all these videos, and then the next day I went out because the last video this gentleman put out was showing you how he finds his trace evidence. And I thought that was fascinating. He gave you the tools. And I think the basis of it was, hey, look, if you think that this is a hoax, you think that, people are doing this, you think this is, Boy Scouts or homeless people or whatever, he's like, I'm going to give you the tools to go find this trace evidence. And I followed those exact things, like what he showed on the video of how to find this stuff. And so I thought, well, I've got nothing else going on. So the next day I grabbed my son, and I think he was like 12 at the time. And we went out to go find this alleged trace evidence, these wood structures. And on the same day we went out to go look for one, we found a wood structure. It was an A-frame wood structure. It was very nice. It had some really good sized pieces that were pretty, big in diameter, and they were ripped out of the ground. They didn't grow there, and they were fashioned into an A-frame type of structure that was probably about, I would say, close to 6 feet tall. And at the bottom of this A-frame structure, there was, some leaves and some foliage that was just completely flat. And I tell this story a lot, but I really feel like looking at the bottom of that wood structure, it looked like something of some weight was sitting there or laying down or whatever. And so it blew my mind when we found this wood structure. I was following the what this gentleman had laid out for his audience. He said, hey, go out and check it out. This is what you look for. This is how you do it. This is how I find mine. You tell me if you think this is a hoax. You think that I'm putting you on. And when that happened, I was hooked. From that point on, I was in the woods every day. Like, I mean, I think I had brought my mom out with me a couple of times. And she had no, she was blown away as well, and so that spiraled into what would become Bexar County Bigfoot. And I started posting some videos on a Facebook group called Project Go and See. And, when I started doing that, I got some attention from a gentleman by the name of Christopher Noel, who is in Vermont. And he kind of took me under his wing. And, he asked me about, voice recorders. If I had deployed a voice recorder, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just snapping pictures and video of these weird looking wood structures that I'm finding, with the tools that have been given to me from this, YouTube channel. And, so he kind of took me under his wing and taught me a little bit about his findings and what he looks for, and just started bouncing ideas off each other. And then he put me on his podcast as well. That was my very first podcast interview ever. And, from there, I've taken anybody from a wildlife biologist out with me to, Aaron Dees, who is in San Antonio from Small Town Monsters. He's written a few books for Small Town Monsters to show him my trace evidence. To up until recently, I've got a chemist that has come out with me. He's got a PhD in chemistry from Harvard University and chemistry engineering, a bachelor's, who is very intrigued by what I present. And so, that's where it's been. Wood structures, I believe, are just pretty much kind of my specialty. And among other things that I have found as well, and I've heard. But yeah, that's where I've been, and that's where it's been for the last 7 years, man.
It sounds like a big journey to go from just to starting off to being out in the woods and everything else you've been looking into. It's
yeah.
It seems like, and I don't want to sound like, it's not like a negative or anything, but it's almost become like an addiction for people. Like once,
it really is.
Like once they get into it, coming from someone who's played music and been in bands or whatever, I totally understand it. Like, the show is my outlet. That's what band stuff used to be for me. So going and doing a podcast made sense because it still lets me have that creative outlet. But for someone that's not doing that, I can understand where this is a new hobby for you.
Yeah. And that's a good point to make. It almost, now nothing will ever take the place of music. I grew up in a musician household. My dad was a musician. He was a former recording artist. So music was always a staple in my life. And I thought to myself, there's nothing that will ever take place in music. I'll be doing this for the rest of my life. And, life has a way of going, well, maybe not, and maybe this will be your new passion. And I think that's what happened. And I'm really thankful for it because, and I tell people this too as well. I'm like, regardless of what you think of these cryptids, I have my own opinions. I have my own theories and things, but I look back and I go, it actually helped me get outside, moving around, walking miles and miles, and the exercise. You know what I mean? Like all of these good things that happened from being outside and out in the woods really helped me out in my mental health as well. And that's what was really struggling with, was my mental health. And this presented something to me that was very positive. And now you go down the rabbit hole, and you're just lost in it now. And that's kind of where I've been.
So for being involved in this for the last 7 years, what do you think? I don't expect a definitive answer, but like, what do you think is really out there? Like, what is a Bigfoot to you?
Man, that's a loaded question, brother. So I'll tell you this. I started out as an aper. I really did. I started out it's from Gigantopithecus. It's a giant ape that's evolved, and we just haven't caught up with it. And, and that's what I thought. And it's not an insult to anybody that is an aper that believes this thing is just solely flesh and blood, right? And what I mean solely flesh and blood, that they just think that that's it is what it is. Like it's a biped that is a North American ape that we have not caught up with, right? So as I got into it more and more and started reading and listening to podcast interviews and looking at Class A sightings and Class B and just trying to put the pieces together, my mindset was changed by the supernatural elements that were just injected into me by some of these first person accounts. I said, hey, I saw the creature. This is what it looked like. Okay, pretty typical, of the characteristics. The behavior was consistent. And then this thing just disappeared right in front of my eyes. Whoa, okay. Or, hey, I saw this creature. and this is what it looked like. Great. It sounds like the typical, type of sighting you would hear. And it had an orb floating in front of it as it was running. Or, hey, I saw this thing and it was up in a tree and it cloaked like the predator. All of these weird supernatural eyewitness accounts, I could not just discard, and I couldn't sit there and go, no. And we're talking about people that are professional people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're talking about people that, some of them are pastors, some of them are businessmen or police, or we're talking about some people that could probably lose their jobs if they put their name out there. But here they are talking about this supernatural experience. And so now I had to sit there and go, you can't just sit there with the blinders on, Rod, and go, nope. It's a flesh and blood creature, and that's what it is. And, end of story. Well, here's the honest to God's truth. We all don't know. None of us know. There's nobody here, I'm convinced, that knows exactly what they are, right? So, but here we have these supernatural experiences and these eyewitness accounts from these people, and it's blowing my mind. So I thought, the mantra that I live by with this stuff is, if you're open to some of it, you have to be open to all of it. There's no way I can sit there and try and make it fit my narrative. No way, because there are so many encounters of it saying otherwise, right? Now, I'm not going to say they're the majority, but we can't discard these types of encounters, right? So I started out like that, as like an April, and then it morphed into what you would maybe call the woo, right? The woo crowd or whatever. I'm right in the middle, is what I would say. I'm right in the middle. I do believe these things do bleed. I do believe that they're physical when they're here, but I do believe there are some that have of these supernatural abilities that we just cannot comprehend. And then I started digging deeper into some Old Testament stuff, and then correlating it with the Book of Enoch. You got the Book of Giants as well, that kind of runs alongside. It's a literary, I guess, companion, you can say, to the Bible. It was part of the Bible, from what I understand, at some point in time, but was discarded for whatever reason. But anyway, that's a whole nother can of worms there. But so now I've come to an understanding that it could possibly be, and I could be totally wrong, that these are remnants of the Raphaim, which are a bloodline of the Nephilim. And that's kind of where I've left it right now. Again, I could be totally wrong. I don't know, but it seems to be kind of leading me in that direction. So that's where I'm at right now.
I don't know if it's just because of podcasting,
Mm-hmm.
but for me, Bigfoot was always just a hairy man out in the woods.
Right.
It was, but since I've started doing this show and I started listening to other shows about 5 years ago, I never listened to a single podcast in my life until 2019. I listened to an episode of Joe Rogan because he had Bob Lazar on.
Oh, wow. I saw that documentary with him.
So
Yeah.
that is the first time I'd ever listened to a podcast.
Yeah.
I was always a band guy, always listened to metal music and stuff. I never had time for podcasts. I always was in music. And then during lockdown season, I had nothing to really do. I had to go to work, and then we weren't doing band things. So I started to check out podcasts because I'd talked to my buddy about all the weird stuff that was going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I come up with the name for the show and all sorts of stuff. But I sat on it for 2 years. But I was listening to a couple different shows, and that's when I started hearing people talk about, like, I started listening to some Bigfoot stuff, and then I listened to a couple other shows, but then the whole Nephilim thing started coming out.
Mm-hmm.
And then portals got real popular, and then also like stuff that I'd never had heard anyone actually talking about relating to cryptids before.
Yeah.
And I don't know where all the research came from. I don't know where their ideas came from. I don't know anything, but that's when the whole woo thing, like for me, was like opening up. And I still didn't believe it.
Right.
Just because it doesn't make sense and whatever. But the more and more I've done this show, I lean more towards that. I don't want to say woo, but like,
right. That supernatural element.
There's something weird in general.
Right.
And I don't know, just because, and I'm very skeptical in general. So since there's never been a body, there's never been anything definitively proven. We've seen videos, we've seen pictures of footprints, we've seen this and that. But for me personally, I've never seen one in person. So I can't say that Bigfoot's 100% real because I personally never saw a Bigfoot. But that doesn't mean I don't believe there's something out there.
Right.
But what it is, I can't tell you. I don't, like you said, I don't think anyone can definitively say what it is because I don't think there's ever been anyone that's actually know what it is or has really like been able to study it.
Right. It's not like you've got one in your garage and you can sit there and ask it questions or study the body, right? I mean, we don't have that, unfortunately.
I have friends that are straight up blood and fur, and it is a undiscovered primate of some sort or hominid.
Right.
And the whole woo aspect or whatever is just all made up bullshit. But and I can see that pathway to it. But then I also go back to, okay, well then why have we never found any?
Right.
Why have there never been any bones uncovered?
Yep.
I work in construction where we build new highways, and I've been on jobs where we've dug up forest, like wooded areas, because we're building a new 4 lanes of highway. So we're digging up stuff in the woods, and I've never, just because I've done it in a small area doesn't mean anything, but like I see it in that aspect. Like, why hasn't anything ever been uncovered? Like, look at how we went from nothing to having roads and housing additions and all this new stuff that's happening all the time. Like, you see all these subdivisions being built. They're always digging. How come we've never come across any sort of skeletons?
Right. Or nobody's just saying anything.
If something is that big of a secret and there's that many people that have uncovered it, what is keeping everyone so quiet and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I can tell you this is kind of a side note. When I started the Instagram account, I think I was maybe a couple of years in with the Bexar County Bigfoot Instagram account. I had a message from somebody that didn't have a profile picture. There was not really a name to the profile. It was a bunch of numbers, like it was just a user, blah 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 blah, right? And this guy, he said he was a man, and he didn't give his name, but because I was like, who am I talking to, ma'am? So I know how to address you, sir, ma'am, or whatever. Said he was a male, and this guy said that he was a part of the clearing of a piece of land that was to be the University of Texas in San Antonio, UTSA. And that patch of land runs close to a very prominent creek greenbelt that runs in and out of the city. And so you've got a pathway, right? And you've got a habitat that supports big game in the form of white-tailed deer. So one thing you have to know about San Antonio is that we don't have bears. We don't have any of the normal predatory animals you would probably see maybe in Colorado or Oregon or Washington State or any of those things, right? We don't have black bears and stuff. We've got maybe you'll hear about a mountain lion every once in a while, maybe, but it's mainly white-tailed deer. That's the kind of the big game. So this guy was telling me that he was a part of the, I guess, architecture or engineering team that was putting together the campus to be University of Texas San Antonio, and he found that there were numerous people that were working the big machinery, the front end loaders and things of that nature that were clearing out the land, they're up and quitting the same day and leaving. And come to find out, there was a story, amongst these guys, and it was like, hey, we're clearing out this land. There's something in the woods that is screaming and growling at us and throwing things at us. And it scared the heck out of these guys. A lot of these guys would quit the same day. So they were rotating people left and right, trying to get, somebody to stay, clear out this land. And a lot of these guys would just up and quit, up and quit, up and quit. And he reached out to me to tell me, hey, look, I'm not going to tell my name or anything like that, but I'm going to tell you that this is what happened. This is what I saw. And that was insane to me because, you're talking about, when you think about an area like San Antonio, any city, and maybe you've got some wooded areas. I got you, and they're clearing out land. You don't think about, running into something like this. And I think that was just one of the things that really changed my mind about a lot of the, I guess, the idea that these things aren't just found in remote areas.
Mm-hmm.
They can travel into suburban areas through these creeks, rivers, green belts, and have to have passage in and out of the area, but it can happen. And so, so like, as far as me thinking that, well, I have to go out and I have to have all this equipment and I have to find these remote areas and have to go out and just, go out and check out these remote areas. It just wasn't the case, because right now, in my backyard, I live up against one of the major creeks that I research. I could walk a couple of miles and bam, there it is. There's the spot where I've done this a casting of a footprint, or where I found this wood structure, or I found this, type of thing. And so that really just kind of changed the narrative for me, because again, I think when you think about this stuff, you're like, well, you have to go out and you have to, go out in this remote area, which I'm not saying that they do not travel or maybe reside in some of these remote areas, but it seems to me that they're not above getting an easy meal. They're not above dumpster diving. They're not above any of those things. As long as there is a creek, green belt, or a river that runs through the area that has some coverage, and the habitat supports big game, and you've got a water source, maybe at least 3 to 5 miles away, you've got a recipe for some cryptid activity. So, but going back to the gentleman I was talking to, that really opened my eyes a lot to that, the type of activity that was happening, at least according to him, in my city. And that just it changed a lot for me. So, I think that, again, I think we're dealing with something that is flesh and blood when it is here. But I think that these creatures do possess some type of supernatural element to them that we can't put our finger on. Because I'm going to tell you this: if it was just a primate, if it was an undiscovered primate in North America, we would have had one. You think about the panda that was a cryptid at one point in time until they discovered it. You think about the mountain gorillas that was essentially a cryptid. There's no way that gorillas could live in these high elevations. Lo and behold, they found them, and yeah, we've documented them. We know they're real. So again, if it's just solely a North American primate we haven't caught up with, I really believe we would have had one by now, and just hasn't happened. At least in my knowledge, it hasn't.
My other aspect to wondering of what this is, because it has to have some sort of intelligence. If it's able to avoid detection somehow,
mm-hmm.
think about technology. Everything has a security camera these days.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has a phone in their pocket. Everyone has a trail cam out there now, hunting, looking for deer or whatever. And then this is where I come back to it, and this is the excuses that get used. And I'm not saying they're wrong. It just sounds convenient.
Mm-hmm.
They know what cameras are. Well, okay. Well, how will they know what a camera is? You know what I mean? Like if they're just an animal, how do they know that this thing takes a photo of them and they don't want to be seen? How do they know the thing in your pocket takes a photo?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do they know the thing on the wall of a building is video camera? Well, they see it. They see the infrared light, so they know to avoid that. Well, how do they know what an infrared light is? Mm-hmm. That's what I'm saying. Like, so the part of being just a flesh and blood animal doesn't add up to me that way. If it is a flesh and blood animal, it has to have some sort of intelligence.
Sure. I'll tell you this, and this is a gentleman that I've partnered up with, who found me. He is I think I just briefly mentioned he's got a PhD in chemistry and a bachelor's in chemistry engineering, and he's a believer. And he's done a lot of DNA sampling with Class A accounts of where the creature stood, water samples, things of that nature. And the DNA studies that he's done, and this is what he told me, he has found anomalous DNA, which makes sense because if anybody has gotten any type of DNA or alleged DNA, it typically comes back, and I'm not saying typically that it just happens all the time type of thing, but what I have read is that it comes back as ape, human, and anomalous DNA that they cannot match up against in the DNA banks at all. There's nothing that matches up, right? He told me that it is more human DNA than ape. A lot more human than DNA. A lot more human DNA than ape. And then coupled with anomalous DNA that he cannot put up against in any, DNA bank, with any animal or, any known creature out there. So when he said that, Rod, it's more human DNA than anything else, the lights went on, right? Because I'm just like, that makes sense. Of course. That's why they're so cunning and smart. That's why they're the masters of their domain. You know what I mean? And so that kind of changed a little bit for me. So, but again, could that be wrong? It could be, but it makes sense though. It makes sense that there are very stealthy. I mean, if we're talking about a creature that possesses a little bit more human DNA than ape, and of course the anomalous DNA, we have no idea what it is. Maybe that part of it possesses the supernatural end of things. Wow, like I can kind of understand why these things have gone undetected for a long time. The other part of it is, I think that, and this is just me. This is just my, and again, I could be wrong. I could be right. I don't know. But for me, I feel like a lot of these creatures are coming up from underneath some underground caverns and cave systems, things like that. So, but going back to your point, if it's just an animal, how does it know that or what a camera is, or hey, somebody had this Class A sighting, they're face to face with this creature, and they pulled out the gun and they pointed at this creature, and this creature just went ballistic when the person pointed the gun at this creature. How do they know that that was a gun? How do they know that that was something that was threatening to them? My only thing would be that they've done a really good job of observing us and kind of gathering, information, about us and what we do. And, maybe they don't know all of the ins and outs of guns or cameras, but they kind of have an understanding of what it is and they stay away from it, type of thing. So, but, I always tell people, then again, I could be wrong. I don't know.
That is the one thing to say when it comes to these topics is I could be wrong because no one really knows.
Exactly. Or I'll tell people this because I am on the wood structure end of things. My forte is the wood structure. I believe it's a viable piece of trace evidence. I believe that people discard it. They don't look at it. The details of any crime scene are very important, no matter how minuscule it is, right? Mm-hmm. So why are we looking at just having these grand Class A encounters when, some of the trace evidence might be staring us right in the face and we are too prideful and, about ourselves and our own agenda to discard this trace evidence that's right there, and understand or try to, maybe we may not understand it, but, try to study it, try to, make sense of it. Right. And so, that for me, it's a very important thing for the, as far as the wood structure goes. But, I tell people you could be right. You could be right. Leaving it open because, here again, like we've just talked about, nobody knows. Not even the quote, and I'm not even going to say experts because I shy away from that term. I don't need a label. I don't need expert next to my name because I'm not an expert. I'm nothing of the sort. I'm a student. That's what I consider myself. And so there's no experts in the field. And I mean, that makes sense to me, but I think we need to look at all points, all evidence presented. We need to look at it.
Some people are too caught up in their own evidence. And by evidence, I'm not saying that they have definitive proof. I'm just thinking they've made their opinion in their brain.
Sure.
And they've collected what they believe is their evidence. And you'll never convince them to come off of it. Like you'll never open their minds to the possibilities of other things because they've already determined in their head what these things are.
Absolutely.
And everyone wants to be the first one to stamp it and say, this is it. I was right. And they want that pat on the back. I don't go that route for anything. So, but I know there's people out there that do. And I think that's why there's a lot of toxicity amongst these communities.
Yes. No, and you're absolutely right. And so here's what I'll tell you about that, and not everybody is out to, be quote, the one that's going to break it all open. There are some people out there that will tell you, yes, I am that person and I toot my own horn. What I will say is that some of these people that you see that are in that area of just going, no, this is what it is. And let me tell you why. Because I've been a police officer for this long. I've been a blah, 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 or I have an education in this. Base it off of education. They base it off of, being an investigator in the, as far as law enforcement or what have you, military, whatever. And while those things are not bad at all, they're not. They're great. In fact, I wish, I wanted to be a cop when I was younger. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying that those things are bad, but it seems to me that the narrative is based off of something that they have done as a trade or a career for a long time. So of course they're going to try and throw it into that category and go, well, based off of, what I've done for a living, it has to be this because this is what I've done for a long time. And, I've always been right in this area. So it's got to be this. Well, we're talking about something that we don't have. We don't have a physical piece. At least the civilians don't have a physical piece or a body to examine. Maybe the powers that be, the government or quote the men in black have. I believe they do, but we don't. We don't know what these things are. So it's still the jury's out type of thing. But I've noticed that people that have that type of narrative that go, well, this is what it is. And where do you base it off? I'm basing off of a career that I have done. I've been an investigator or a detective for blah 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 years, and I know what I'm looking for, and I know blah blah blah. And based off of my, expertise, this is what it is. Well, you could be wrong too. You're a human just like anybody else, and so that's what I think. That's what makes it so much, I think, fun and interesting, but also frustrating in a way, because you've got so many people out there that just, God, there's so much, there's so many feuds and backbiting and just, back and forth. It's insane.
There's too many cooks in the kitchen.
Dude, yes, absolutely. And I stay away from that, but I'm the guy in the background going, hey, y'all want to look at some wood structures? I'm the nerd in the back going, hey man, like look at this teepee over here. Like, look, so, that's what I've noticed with some of the people that are, quote, that know it all type of thing. And I think pride definitely injects itself into that equation, which I try to approach everything with the utmost humility. I know nothing. I'm just a knucklehead out there in the woods trying to make sense of this stuff,
I think that's the best way to go about business, is to just, you do your research and you're just presenting what you find, and you're not out there telling people exactly what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you what I think it could be.
Right.
If you want to ask my honest opinion, I could tell you what I feel like these things could be. But that doesn't make me right. And nor do I tell anybody else that they're wrong in what they believe. And what I really feel like I present is, again, I believe what I present is very viable trace evidence. And I believe that people do not pay attention to it enough. And I get a lot of flack for just saying that I believe these creatures can travel into suburban areas. There's no way, I get this all the time. There's no way that a Sasquatch could come into San Antonio. I'm like, really? You're speaking on behalf of a creature you have no idea? You're speaking on behalf of that creature. Like you're telling me, like, exactly what these things do. You can't. There's no way. But here's what I do present, right? If the habitat supports big game, if there is a creek, greenbelt, or even a river that has plenty of coverage with that big game going through, in and out, you have to have safe passage in and out. You have a recipe for some cryptid activity. You absolutely do. Because now you could have a water source, you could have a highway, and for me, in my area in San Antonio, we have what's called the Salado Creek. So the Salado Creek is a historical creek, and it runs literally from north outside the outskirts of San Antonio all the way into the city, into the south side, obviously going north-south, all the way outside of the city into other little small towns. It is a highway, and it's riddled with white-tailed deer, raccoons, possums, squirrels. All the usual suspects. We've got fox as well. We've got ring-tailed cats, which are very nocturnal, very rare. But we've got all of these things that are in these creeks that are very prominent, that present safe passage in and out of the city. And why would that not be a cryptid highway, right? But also, what I add on to that is this: connected to that particular creek, there are numerous wilderness parks that are connected to these creeks. That's where I find a lot of these wood structures. But I do go in the places where people don't go, in these big wilderness parks. So why is it that I'm able to look at all of these wilderness parks in my area that are connected to this creek and find all of this, quote, trace evidence in the form of these wood structures? And I have found prints as well. Is it just people going out there and just doing this stuff just to hoax you? Is it the Boy Scouts? Is it homeless people? Is it bushcraft? It's just very interesting. But those are the things that I look at and I present, and I get a lot of pushback on it. Like, there's no way. There's no way. Well, again, you're speaking on behalf of a species or a creature that you know nothing about. You're telling me that you know exactly the characteristics and the habits of these creatures. You're telling me that. Nope, nobody can answer me that question. So, the jury's out, but I think what I present is very viable, and I think it's very plausible that it can be, that way.
I'm going to be out in the woods here for this documentary, filming things. For someone that comes across wood structures, like, what should I be looking for?
So what you want to look for is, did those pieces grow in that area? Scan around the area that encompasses that wood structure, right? Did those pieces grow there? Number one. Were they ripped out? Number two, do they have the root system attached to them? The other thing, right? How tall are they? Notice that some of these pieces, take a look at some of these pieces, they are torn limb from limb, totally naked until there's no limbs. It's just a straight or whatever angle this piece of wood is going. And then also look at the bark. A lot of times these bark are stripped completely off of these trees, right? How is it fashioned? Is it a teepee? Is it an A-frame? Is it a lean type of structure? Or is it what I call a wigwam, where it has kind of maybe a flat top or a dome-shaped type of top to it? And then look inside of it. Look inside of it. A lot of the times, what I find inside some of these wood structures are a series of different types of rocks that are placed. Now, I don't know what those rocks are placed there for, but they're typically placed inside for whatever reason. Some of them have been maybe whittled down to maybe a sharp edge to use for I don't know what, but that's something that I've found that has been consistent. The other part of it is that sometimes there are these, what I call these fake fire pits that are close by, if not in front of the wood structure itself. And what I mean by fake fire pit is that some of these things have a round circle of rocks, and then they'll put these pieces of wood like it's kindling in the middle of these rock circles, like it was like a fire, but yet nothing's been burnt. There's no carbon, nothing at all. There's no matches around there. There's no lighters. There's no beer cans. There's no anything that says like, hey, I'm a human, I was here camping type of thing. So you have to look at all of those elements. The main thing is look at the type of tree that these wood structures that this wood has been used for, and determine, has it grown in this area? Is it from this area, or is it from an area that's maybe miles away or a mile away or whatever type of thing. So what I have found is that some of these pieces of wood that I find that are fashioned to a teepee or whatever type of wood structure, they're torn limb from limb. The bark is torn off. The root system is still attached, meaning that something with great strength has pulled this tree right out of the ground and drug it into this area to make this type of wood structure. And did this tree grow here? And I will tell you from my experience, 9 times out of 10, you'll find that the trees that have been pulled out, if you look at them with the root system, did not grow in that area. So something or someone with great strength drug this 12-foot tree that's 8 inches around with the root system still attached to build this thing. And that's when you sit there and go, this is weird. Who would do that, right? So then, but I have to debunk myself, right? I have to really debunk myself. I can't sit there and go, oh yes, a Sasquatch built this, and this is it, and blah blah blah, whatever. No, I have to look at all of those points. Okay, have they been pulled out of the ground? Have they been torn? Did the tree grow there? Type of thing. All these things, right? And then I have to determine whether if I think it's people or not. And the way I do that is this: if it's bushcraft, and you've probably seen bushcraft done before, or maybe you've seen the videos, right? So if you know about bushcraft, you know that these pieces are going to be consistent in length and size because there is an objective with these bushcraft shelters, meaning that they are going to try and keep out the elements. They're trying to keep somebody warm. They're trying to keep somebody out of the rain, trying to keep somebody out of the wind or the sun, right? When these wood structures that I come up against do none of those things, they don't keep out sunlight, they don't keep out rain, they don't keep out wind. Okay, now we've got something different. That wasn't a human. Then you've got the homeless people theory, which crumbles every time because the homeless people in my areas, they've got tents. They've got tents. They don't go out and pull out trees out of the ground and put them into teepee structures or wigwams or whatever, right? Okay, so you've got that's thrown out. Then you've got the Boy Scout theory. Well, it's Boy Scouts, right? Okay, I've been keeping tabs on my areas for 7 years, morning, noon, and evening, right? Not always consistently, but for 7 years. You would think within 7 years, I would have seen a Boy Scout or a troop, making these things. Never happened. Not a single person. So, if you keep tabs on the area over a period of time, as consistent as you can, and you have not seen a person with a piece of wood putting these things together, then you've got a recipe for something that could be cryptid.
My thought process when it comes to the structures, other than a shelter for people making them, or even if someone's trying to hoax it, who are they hoaxing it for? Like, it's just random because I've seen the way trees have fallen down and laying down before, because I used to go disc golfing quite a bit when I've been out like at some of the state parks or something. And I never really thought anything of it other than, oh, that's weird. And I just kept going. Like, does that mean a Sasquatch did it? No. But
yeah, exactly. Yep.
I don't understand why people would do that. It just seemed random for someone to do that. And like, until you actually start getting into Bigfoot lore and everything else, no one, the average person, is not going to think anything about that other than they're not going to relate that to a Bigfoot unless they've watched a show that said something about it being Bigfoot.
Right.
So, if it's not a big, if it's not,
you got to think about this, Brandon. The percentage of people that know about this stuff, that is super low. It's minuscule.
Right.
Minuscule.
With the TV shows, it's made it a little bit more popular, but it's still not enough to where I think random people are just going out in the woods and making these things just for shits and giggles.
Exactly.
For someone to maybe come across it and be like, oh, look at that. And then that's it. Why waste your time?
Yeah. Why? Exactly. And then, I've gotten the whole, well, it's teenagers, Rod. And I'm thinking, I'm a father of 4 teenagers. Okay. I've got one in the Army. I've got a 20-year-old, and then I've got, a 15 and a 19-year-old. Okay. These kids are not going to get off their phones and go out in the woods and put wood pieces together. There's no way.
It's like it's pulling teeth to get kids to want to go out and do anything at this point.
Absolutely it is, right? I grew up in the 80s, and I was out in the woods whenever I could. Man, I was just, now I can see if we were having this conversation in the 80s and 70s, okay, maybe, right? I could say, yeah, you know what, could be. But not now. There's no way. It just doesn't happen.
I grew up in the late 90s, as far as like when I was out doing dumb shit with my buddies, and late 90s, early 2000s when we were like senior in high school or whatever. So I could see going out, because we used to go out in the woods and we made funny videos and stuff like that, but we never did anything like that. Like we didn't know of anything, wood structures or anything like that. So how many times did I encounter something out there that I've just never even thought of?
Right. And I think chances are, growing up, if you had gone to national parks or wilderness parks in your area, chances are you've walked right past these things, never gave it a second thought. And that's what I tell people. You probably walked past these things and never thought about it at all. Never thought about it. And so, I that's when I come in and I go, let's look at the lay of the land here. Let's look at the topography. Does it make sense for these creatures to come in and out of your area? And so I'm of the mindset that these things can and have traveled through suburban areas, given the right topography, the right landscape, if you will, and given the fact that in these wilderness parks that I have in my area, there's no hunting allowed. You can't go out and pop off a whitetail over here. You can't go out and camp in these wilderness parks. You can't. So who or what is building these things in these wilderness parks, and why are they all over the place? Is it one team of people running around just doing this stuff with incredible strength, or do we have a cryptid problem? I tend to think that it's more of the cryptid area than people, that's the argument I present. And and could I be wrong on some of this stuff? I could be, and I'm not going to doubt it. I'm not going to sit there and go, no, it's definitely a Sasquatch or a Dogman or whatever the heck it is. It's out there doing this. I don't leave it like that. But I do find it very, very strange, very strange. So, I think for me, I'll tell you this. I have friends, that are cryptozoologists, that are, they put their content out, and it's really cool, and it's very well thought out. It's awesome. And it's like, wow, yeah, okay, I got you. I understand. But when I come along, a guy like me comes along and says, hey, look, I want you to look at this. I get so much crap from people because, again, my whole thing is, you guys want to look at these, you want to focus on these Class A sightings, and you want to focus on this, which is nothing wrong with that. But let's be honest. Let's look at the details of the scene here, And not only that, if you listen to any Sasquatch podcasts with people that are having encounters with these creatures, some of them live in rural areas, some of them live by rivers, by creeks, they live out in the woods, what have you, and they go, well, man, I saw this weird looking wood structure thing that was in the woods on my property, and I looked at it, and whoa, I just saw the creature like come out behind it, or in the area of this anomalous wood structure. These things are correlative. They really are, but you have to really listen. You have to really listen to some of these encounters to really grab this stuff. And you'll find that some of these people will, and I'll tell you this, even watching, I was just watching the last whole season of what do you call it, Expedition Bigfoot, and they're recapping a lot of the seasons. I think on maybe one of the episodes. I could be wrong, but some of the recaps were like, "Whoa, they found these TPs, they found this, they found that." Now, granted, they are out in the remote areas. I get it, but these things are being seen. and nobody's really looking at them as a viable piece of trace evidence, or at least from what I've seen. I know most people aren't. They disregard it as homeless people, Boy Scouts, bushcraft, what have you, type of thing. So, but yeah, it's amazing. It's interesting though.
When someone comes across them and they're out in the middle of nowhere where people shouldn't even be in the first place, like if they're up, nearest town is 50 miles away.
Right.
Who is out building these things for what purpose? Now,
exactly. Yep.
I'm not saying that the ones that are around here are made by people, because just from my own local area, I have a map sitting here I'm looking at. This is part of the reason I'm doing a documentary, is because there's been so many weird sightings in this small area that I'm from. And there is a spot right here that has had multiple different encounters with something. And then if you follow this pathway about 1.5 miles, it leads to a woods where someone else has reported a Bigfoot. And if you go down the road about 1 mile, there's been someone that said 4 years ago now, a Bigfoot walked in front of their vehicle. There's a lot of sightings within like a 3 square mile radius. And again, it's right by rivers, and it's a wooded area. So there's a lot of strange stuff that happens around these areas.
Absolutely. And that's where I say, pay attention to the lay of the land. I live by a river. I live by a creek. I live by a greenway. These are all highways for these creatures because they present a safe passage in and out. It presents kind of an easy meal, right? It makes sense. Think about it this way. If you were somebody that was trying to get in and out of an area and wanted to be undetected, and you've got this nice creek that has a really, thick canopy, and there's lots of resources at your disposal as far as like wildlife and plants and water. You're going to use that as a highway. You're going to use that to your advantage. And if you don't want to be seen, man, I could hide in the vegetation of this creek. I could hide, in this area of this river, or what have you. These things are almost always seen in close to people, where people live, off of these creeks, rivers, and green belts. And that makes all the sense to me. Makes all the sense to me.
I'm going to throw a question at you here. You mentioned like the waterways and everything. If you think of things, and I don't want to call it the woo side to it, but basically just level with me. If in the paranormal field, they consider water a conduit of energy.
Yes.
They feed off of that. That's how they grow their energy. It's something that like it helps bring out the paranormal activity, I guess. Like they say that energy is because of the constant flow of the water. It feeds the spirits or whatever. What if these creatures, Bigfoot, whatever they are, use that water as their source of energy too? Like if they're from if we're going on that whole woo side, what if that's something that they don't just travel down it, like that is how they are morphed into with the energy from the water systems?
Man, that's wow. Yeah, no, that's interesting. That might be something. Yeah. I wouldn't, I can't say that it's, far-fetched, because again, a lot of some of these encounters that I've read and heard about, these things tend to have some type of supernatural ability. Some say that these things are coming out of portals. And maybe that water poses as some type of a portal, um, from here to another dimension, if you will, type of thing. So yeah, that's something. I've thought about that kind of, but not to that depth, but I thought of something in that area. Yeah.
I just look at it like if a lot of people are reporting seeing these things around a water source, and I understand obviously animals in general are normally around water sources, but a lot of people claim that paranormal activity is influenced from water sources too.
Mm-hmm.
So if these Bigfoot are a supernatural being, is it possible that maybe the water sources is also part of what powers them to be here? Like people encounter a ghost.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's part of the Bigfoot thing.
Yeah, I would not doubt that at all. Um, I've got so here's something interesting. We went out, me and my new friend, a friend of mine. I think I talked about him. He's a chemical engineer. He's got a PhD in chemistry. He's a believer. He's somebody that has spoken at Bigfoot conferences. Published author, really cool gentleman. I made friends with him through a network of other friends as well, and we went out to an area that I took him to, and I I thought, well, hey, look, let me introduce you to this area as kind of scratching the surface type of thing of one of the areas that I've documented for a long time. And then we'll go over to another part of town where, I've documented this and this and so on and so on, right? So we went to this area. He has this frequency machine that he's made himself, and it's really cool. It measures it. So what his thing is that he says that we give off a frequency. So when you're alive, you give off a certain frequency. When you're dead, your body still gives off a frequency as far as your bones and things of that nature, right? So this machine that he has can detect whether if you're buried or kind of if you're alive, because it'll give off a certain number in this frequency, right? And he could triangulate, where this person might be buried, or hey, there you are, you're alive. I can find you with this meter type of thing. Anyway, it's kind of beyond me. I'm like, I wasn't really good in school, so I'm just I'm just kind of that guy. But anyway, we went out and we started we went out a couple of weeks ago, and I took him to this one spot, and his meter was going off. Like, he was like, man, this is remarkable. I've never seen this. I've never heard this, like, type of thing, which is really cool. And um he said, this could be something of maybe it's a burial ground, Rod. And I'm thinking, what, really? And so we're looking at these piles of rocks that I've documented over the years in this particular area. And some of them will be moved into a pile. Some of them will be moved into different shapes, like a circle, if you will, right? Circles, these big rock circles. And, there was one area where there's this wood structure that kind of covered up this rock bed that was inside the wood structure. Like, these rocks were placed in a very strategic way, and these pieces of wood covered it up as if it was guarding something. So his theory was this could be a burial ground. I'm like, what? He's like, no, it could be early settlers that were here, or it could be something else. We don't know. So we weren't ruling out whether if it could be, people that had settled in, this area early on, and, they passed away and they were buried here type of thing, or it could be something else, right? So we go into this area this morning, and we dig, and I didn't dig we didn't dig very deep at all. It was just maybe like a foot, and really nothing going on. And he said, hey, well, wait a minute. Let me go through with my meter again over the hole to see if it picks up anything. Because if we're close, it could pick up something, because we're getting closer, right? And it will pick it up. And all of a sudden, it just didn't pick up over that hole. And I'm like, what the heck? And he's like, yeah, this is strange. He's like, this is weird. Mind you, he's used this machine in several different, several different states, in different areas where they found buried, people, things like that. And so he's like, this is really weird. I'm like, okay, cool. We came to the determination that the rocks that were involved in these areas gave off some type of magnetic or some type of weird frequency. Now, these are just regular rocks. You would look at them and go, well, there's nothing special about them. I don't see anything. But here we are, and this frequency thing is kind of going off over these rocks. He's like, there's something with these rocks. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, there's something very weird. It's very strange with these rocks. And I'm like, okay. So he's going to analyze one of these rocks. But my point of telling you this is that some of these rocks that I've seen in this area were fashioned into a big circle. And I've gone back to other accounts where people are talking about, and maybe, these podcasters that I've talked to as well. Some of them have said, maybe these are portals, Rod. These rocks are made, and they're put in this type of circle as portals to go in and out of other dimensions for these creatures. And when they're here, they're flesh and blood, and they can go, in and out to another world. So I found it very interesting that these rocks gave off this type of weird, crazy frequency, and they had some type of magnetic field, a very strong magnetic field to them. It was very odd. So, saying that water is a conductor, absolutely, hands down. But also, too, there's other elements out there that could contribute to these things traveling in and out of other dimensions, type of thing. So, I don't put it past, these types of things utilizing, whether if it's water or rocks and things like that. So, yeah. So to your point, I'm with you. I'm kind of, and also too, I'll tell you this: you've got an area called, the land between the lakes, the LBL, right? Have you heard of the LBL?
Yeah, I know about it.
Okay. So people feel like that area, because of the water and where it's at, some people will say that's kind of a conductor, and that's contributing to some of the sightings of these dogmen and Sasquatch, if you will, that are, that's why they're having these encounters, because of, that whole water conductor thing as well. So, I don't know. It's interesting though.
I think there's a lot of things that somehow are connected, and it's just a matter of time before we can piece more stuff together. But at the same time, it's just us spitballing and throwing things at the wall and see what sticks right now. Because again, like we've said many times, no one really knows and no one has the answers.
Yeah, you're right. I think you're right.
Well, we've been going on for a little over an hour, so I figure we could get ready to wrap this one up. But before we do, I would like for you to let everyone know where they can find your information for your research group and everything.
Yeah. So the main, if you want to message me and you want to see a social media platform that's a lot more accessible in my eyes, has been Instagram. So Instagram, Bexar County Bigfoot, Bexar County Bigfoot, all one word. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok, same thing, Bexar County Bigfoot. And then Facebook, I have a private group. So you can request to be a part of the group, and you have to answer just a couple of questions type of thing. and then I'll go in and approve you. Basically saying, hey, don't be a jerk, and do you believe? The typical type.
The typical things they get on the group pages.
Right. But one thing you have to know about the Bexar County Bigfoot Facebook group is that it's private, and I keep it that way for a reason. I have a small amount of people. We're probably a little over 500, and I kind of like it smaller, only because, and I hope nobody gets offended by this, I'm after quality and not quantity. You know what I mean? So just because you're a believer and, you get in there and you just start rattling off all kinds of crazy stuff, I really try to sift through and vet people. And that's just me. That's just my prerogative. That's just the way I do things. Because, there's a lot of trolls out there. You know this. There's a lot of people out there that will say nasty things, disrespectful things. And I try to shield my people from that. And that's why I keep it small. But if you're that person that, is open-minded and you're not going to be disrespectful, please, be a part of, ask for approval, and, I'll go through and check you out and stuff. I also have another page, a group on Facebook that's called South Texas Monster Hunters. And that one's pretty, open and lax. And then I have another page that's going on 5,000 members, and that is Bigfoot 101. So any of those, you'll be able to find me. I post my content on there, those as well. And then YouTube is also the same thing, Bexar County Bigfoot. So basically all platforms, you could find me. Instagram is kind of the main one for me, though. So, you can find me there.
Awesome. Well, Rod, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Dude, it's been an honor. I appreciate your time, man.
If you'd like to be a guest on Tinfoil Tales, remember to send an email to tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com or go to tinfoiltales.com and go to the contact section. Make sure to follow me around on all the social medias. And just remember, truth comes at a cost. Are you willing to pay the price?
I heard a story late last night about something lurking along the wood line. Huge footprints, strange lights in the sky. They claim it's nothing, but I know they lie. It's easier to laugh in my face, but something about this makes me say, what if it's real? What if they knew? What if the answers are coming from you? Spinning stories, wasting my time, hearing voices, is it all in their minds? They can call me crazy, but I just want some proof. What if it's true? What if it's real? What if it's true? What if the world's not what we knew? Tinfoil tales pulling me in, a story that starts where the logic ends. What if it's real? What if it's true? The answers are waiting, they're waiting for you. They see a dog man walking, or maybe a mothman flies above the buried giants, hidden beneath the lies. They say it's just stories, it's all make-believe. Fairy tales for the things we can't perceive. They want to keep us blinded, they want to break our will. But I'm not buying it, I'm not swallowing another pill. Force-fed poison, the lies we're made to believe. What if the truth could set us free? Alien signals traveling through time, secret space programs erasing their minds. They call them crazy, but I just need some proof. What if it's true? What if it's real? What if it's true? What if the world's not what we knew? Tinfoil tales pulling me in, a story that starts where the logic ends. What if it's real? What if it's true? The answers are waiting, they're waiting for you. They laugh, they lie, we all could die, but the signs are there if you the Nephilim too. What if it's me? Or what if it's real? What if it's real? What if it's true? What if the world's not what we knew? Tinfoil tales pulling me in, a story that starts where the logic ends. What if it's real? What if it's true? The answers are waiting, they're waiting for you. It's all in our heads, it's all in our minds. These voices can't be silenced, the truth must rise. Tinfoil tales, it's pulling me through. What if it's real? What if it's true?